Hey everybody, so this is my latest project. I put an ice tower that was intended to be used with a Raspberry Pi 4 on an Orange Pi 5. When I started this project, there wasn't really a good cooling solution for the Orange Pi 5. There's a heatsink case thing that's kind of just like a black aluminum heatsink, but it uses really thick thermal pads. Even with like upgrading the fan, I experimented with that. Even doing that, it still thermal throttles under a load. So I've seen some people just take a regular ice tower and zip tie it down to their board or whatever. So I thought, hey, this is something I know a thing or two about. So I'll, make the proper brackets, make a kit to convert it. And then as these metal brackets that I had to have, I had to order them, had to have them laser cut. My laser cutter won't do metal. They were, 2 days away from being delivered, and I saw that 52 Pi had released their own ice tower kit, but it's a low profile based on like the Raspberry Pi low profile. I don't know if they're going to come out with one like this. It's not the same, I used a different one. So this isn't compatible with theirs at all. This is my own thing that I did. Also, in the time that I was working on this, Orange Pi came out with an Orange Pi 5B, which I think is just this board, but with Wi-Fi and eMMC module in place of the M.2 slot that this one has. And then they also came out with a Orange Pi 5 Plus, which is a whole different beast. It has an upgraded system on a chip, so this won't work with that one either. So a lot of stuff here that it won't work with. It's just kind of my own thing that I did. And I had to order basically enough of these metal brackets to do 10 or 11 cases. Designed my own MiniDesktop style case for it here. So anyway, all the stuff, if you want to make your own, there's a link to the STLs on printables. Even the metal brackets, you'll have to figure out getting a metal cut on your own, I guess. If you want to just buy one as a kit, I've got a few left on my Etsy. There'll be a link for that down there too. And I've got a couple of pairs of brackets yet. I could still make a couple more cases, but then that's it. I've already sold some of them. I sent one away to somebody else, so it's all almost gone. Anyway, in this video, we're going to talk about it a little bit, and we're going to assemble it. So I am going to go ahead and take the side of the case. I've already taken 2 of these screws out, so I don't have to fumble with so many screws on the video. But it's going to be one of those kind of videos. I'm going to fumble screws. I'm going to ramble. I'll probably repeat myself and also forget to say something that's really important somewhere along the line. So we'll take the side of the case off so that we can get the stuff out of it. This was my first time getting like anything laser cut out of metal. So it was kind of an experiment, kind of a learning process. So I made 2 different kinds of brackets, kind of hedging my bets. These 2 I've marked with Sharpie, GPIO on one side and HDMI on the other. And you can see they're not symmetrical. If we line up this hole and that hole, then these out here are like kind of way off. Whereas the kind that are on the printables and most of the cases that I've sold thus far use this kind where they are symmetrical. The reason that these are asymmetrical is because the board is a little bit asymmetrical. The system on a chip is not in the center in this direction. So if you want to put the heatsink directly over the center of the system on a chip, then you've got to make asymmetrical brackets. But if you want to just be easy about it, it's you can make these symmetrical brackets, but they cause the heatsink to not be perfectly centered. But we're talking about a couple of millimeters here. So one of the neat things about the Orange Pi 5 is that it has a place to put an NVMe drive. It's kind of weird because they put it on sideways, so it could have been up here and going that way, and it would have all a long 2280 common like desktop style NVMe drive would have fit this way, but they didn't do that. That is an advantage of the Orange Pi 5 Plus. Anyway, you get your Orange Pi 5, the regular one, you take it out of the box, take it out of the plastic bag, and there's nothing else in it. It's just the board, and they've just left these 2 holes for you to kind of figure out how you're gonna connect this. I've seen some people like hot glue it. I've held these things on these kind of things before with tape or whatever. But anyway, my first thing was to kind of fix that. So, or, figure out a solution for that. So this case, you can, take one side off and then take the bottom off, and you've got access to that NVMe drive on the bottom, so you could switch it out if you wanted to load up a different operating system. But it would require, holding a nut on the other side of this while you put it together. It's cumbersome, and so if it were a finished product, there would be a threaded hole there, and all you'd have to do is get the screw started in the threaded hole. So that's what this is. It's just 2 threaded holes. So one of them you can screw down to the board, and it'll hold the other one in place so that you can use that one to attach the drive. And that way you can swap drives quickly without having to fumble with a nut on the other side of the board. So that's what we're doing here. So I'm taking this thing apart, and the 2 halves of it, there's a sort of a narrow half and a wider half, and they have, on one side of them, they have these little rings around the screw holes. So those rings there are to help align it on these holes and kind of help keep everything aligned. So if we put it up there in the right orientation, it'll kind of not really snap into place, but it'll kind of key in, and you don't have to kind of keep everything aligned. Oh, except we need to put this piece on. So this piece goes on the same way. It's got the same thing going on. So once you get it lined up, kind of pinch it like that, it can't move out of place. And once one screw is tightened down, you'll always have the other screw hole. So this will work with the 2230 or a 2242 length M.2 drive. Either way, so if you're going to use a 2230, then you would put this first screw in the outer hole. And if you're using 2242, you'd put it on the inner hole, leaving the outer hole open to screw things down. You'd probably want to put a piece of tape over it so that you don't have to worry about your NVMe drive shorting out on it. So now you can do that, and you've got this hole that's just held there. So it may be kind of overcomplicated and half-baked, but it seems to work pretty good, and solves kind of a problem. I see a lot of people get these and like, I don't think they included my screw. Like, I don't know, they didn't include anybody's screw. So there's that, and now it can be changed inside there without fumbling with a nut or whatever. So now we need to get the board ready to accept the heat sink, and we're going to use this is a ice tower cooler for a Raspberry Pi 4. So this is just the hardware that came with the ice tower cooler for the Raspberry Pi 4. So at each corner, we're just going to use one of these little standoffs that they give you with the ice tower cooler, and we're using one of the nuts. So there are 2 different styles. The type, if you're making your own, or if you get the majority of the cases that I've done, they use this. I use this little threaded collar in place of the nut. I called these nut complicateds. I believe that's what the file is called. I took something simple, just a simple little hex nut, and I made it as complicated as I could be. It's a printed, little printed cylinder that's hollow into which I have pressed a brass threaded insert. And the idea is that this would go in place of these nuts. It's a little easier to get them started, a little less to fumble with. And also, once that's done, you've kind of got legs on the bottom of this. But you kind of have legs anyway, because these have a standoff. Like, the lowest point is not this. That was kind of the idea of these, was to prevent this whole thing from just, if you're not using the case, from just sitting on the NVMe drive. But that's actually not really a problem. So these are the asymmetrical brackets. So one is marked GPIO and one is marked ground. They're going to go like that. But before we do that, we got to screw them on the bottom of the heatsink. But they're going to mount like that. And if you are concerned that they're not right, just kind of hold them up like that, and you should see that they are, like, right here, the brackets are centered above the system on a chip. Whereas if we use the symmetrical ones, which are actually what are uploaded to printables, we get it all on there. Probably won't be able to see it because, like I say, it's a fraction of a millimeter, but these will be kind of off center on there. Hopefully that you can kind of see how that. So anyway, we're just working with these symmetrical ones. So we're going to kind of sit this all how it's going to go together. Kind of like that and kind of like that. And then the heatsink's going to come down like this. And the fan is going to point towards the HDMI port. See, that's why it's marked HDMI, because it's right there adjacent to the HDMI port. So it's going to be like that. So then we're just going to take this and flip it up so we can see the screw holes. We're going to try to get one of these screws started. I fumble this every single time I try. because my screwdriver is just a little bit magnetic, but not enough that it helps. I could demagnetize it, but that would require remembering that it's a problem after I turn the camera off. So we're going to tighten that down, and I am holding this by this heat block. I'm not holding this and tightening like this. I'm holding it by the heat block so that the torque that I'm putting on this screw isn't trying to twist the heat pipe at all. This heat pipe, it's very flexible, bends easily. And in addition to that, they often can, if you put too much force on them, they can break loose like this. So we don't want to do that, so we're holding it in such a way that we're not putting force on this joint between these two different kinds of metals here. This one is just a mirror image of the other. We can even kind of just stand this up and take one of our screws here, drop it through the hole, get the screwdriver started on it. See what I mean? The screwdriver is a little bit magnetic. And then tighten that down, and again, hold this like this when you tighten this screw. You will also probably want to, you don't really need to, but you probably want to, the ice tower, when you take it out of the box, the wire comes out of the bottom of the fan. You'll probably want to undo these 4 screws, rotate it 90 degrees so the wires come out the side like this. Just makes it a little closer. They're a little stretched a little tight if you have it go under. If you have it go under, you might want to try to feed them between the heat sink and the block here and go out that way. Anyway, I think it's better to do it this way. It keeps everything a little cleaner. And again, when you're tightening these 4 screws down, don't be holding this by the heat block and tightening, or don't already have it screwed down on here and be holding it that way. Hold it by the heat sink so that you're not putting extra pressure on that joint. So now this is ready to go down on the top, but we'll take a look at this. If you look down in there between the metal sort of T-shaped heat block and the system on a chip on the board, right down in there, there is a gap. And that gap is there because all of this stuff we've got here is intended for the Raspberry Pi, and it has a metal heat spreader over the top of the system on a chip. So the system on a chip is taller by about 1 millimeter. Additionally, these brackets that I had laser cut, I got them the closest I could in thickness to the brackets that came with the ice tower, but these, get it over 2 millimeters here. This is like a 1.6 millimeter thickness, and this is like a 1.4 millimeter thickness. So it's 2 millimeters. It's 0.2 millimeters higher that this heatsink is going to sit because of the thickness of these brackets, and it's over a processor that's 1 millimeter lower because it doesn't have that heat spreader on the top. So we've got a 1.2 millimeter gap in there. So I have devised 2 different ways to deal with this. If you get a kit from me, you'll get both of these, but you'll need paste with one of them. So the easy way to do this is just to get this little thermal pad. I've used this one before. I'll cut another one for this case before I list it on Etsy. So peel off any plastic that's on there. You probably ought to peel off 1 piece of plastic and then put it on there. Something like that. It's not going to be as wide as the processor because this on the bottom is not as wide as the processor. So when you put it down like that, you want to kind of look down in there and make sure that it's all centered. You can kind of look in from an angle here, make sure there's not like a bunch of heat pads sticking out on one side or the other. You want it to have a little bit of a rock still when it's just sort of sitting on there. That tells you that it's making contact in the middle and not just out at the 4 corners, and there's no gap in the middle. And then you do the remaining 4 screws that came with the ice tower to screw it down. So that's one way to do it. But it's easy to do it that way, but it doesn't cool as well. So we're going to take this back off, and I'll throw it away because it's probably not something that ought to be reused. So the other way is this little little copper shim that just went under the bench. So this is a 1.2 millimeter thick copper shim, and it is specifically a shim that is intended to be used in this way. So this is Noctua thermal paste. This is what I've been using. This is what I did all my testing with, but I think this thing is empty, and I can barely get the lid off of it. So we're just going to put a little glob, and if it won't come out of this one, we're going to switch over to this other which is just something that came free with a heatsink. I wouldn't use just something free that came with a heatsink, except that, you know, I'm probably just going to put this together to demonstrate and then take it back apart. So that's probably too much on there, but you want something about like that, a little glob of it. And then you want your little copper thing. I have cleaned this with rubbing alcohol to make sure, and then dried it to make sure that it's not, I don't have any greasy fingerprints or anything from underneath the bench when I dropped it a minute ago. So we're going to put it on there like that. And now that is basically like the system on a chip on the Raspberry Pi. It has a heat spreader, so the heat spreads all around the system on a chip, and it's taller to about the appropriate height for this. So now we're going to take another little dab of this, but instead of putting it on here, we're going to put it on the bottom of the heatsink. Specifically, we're going to put it along this heat pipe. Probably, that again is probably too much. And we're going to put this down, make sure we got it going the right way. And again, we'll feel it rock a little bit when we get it on there. That's actually good because it means that it's making contact in the middle and not out at the corners. If it's making it's not out here where the screws are. It's not being held up above the level of the top of the system on a chip. So that's what we're trying to do here. Don't tighten any of these 4 screws until you get them all started. Just a general good rule of thumb for life. I think I dropped one of these screws on the floor, so I'm going to have to go fishing for that. I promised myself I wasn't going to drop a bunch of stuff on the floor this time, but I couldn't help myself. All right, I'll use this one. This is not one of the screws that came with the ice tower, but it shouldn't matter. It's still an M2.5 screw. So now they're all on. So ice towers come with a 3-wire fan now. The 3rd wire is for like a PWM function. That is even something you can get going in the Orange Pi. I've seen people upload their own scripts to the Orange Pi subreddit for controlling a fan. But we're not going to set it up that way. We're going to set it up for just 5 volt, running high power all the time. If you want to run 3 volt, it's just exactly like the Raspberry Pi. If you want to run 3 volt, you just move this to the first pin on the second row instead of the second pin on the first row. That would be 3 volt. The fan would not run as fast, it would not cool as well, but this thing has like a lot of overhead on the cooling anyway, so we're gonna it especially has a lot of overhead on the cooling if you do it with the copper shim instead of the heat pad, the thermal pad. So now the idea of the rest of this is just that the inside of the case, this is another, the same case, just it's wood and red instead of the Gulf livery with the orange and blue one. The idea of this is that these stacks at the corners, they just kind of fit into these like notches in the side of the case. And this red one is set up to use these sort of overcomplicated nuts, whereas this blue one is set up to just use the nuts that came with the ice tower. So that's how we've got it set up. I'm going to take this case, loosen these 4 screws here. I'm going to spread it open. I'm going to take the top panel out. And then this just kind of drops in on one side, get the ports in place, kind of swing the other side in. Like that, and once it's in, it can't move like this because it's totally like captured by these little things on the kind of these little wings that come out to keep it all centered. The button at this point should work, and it shouldn't have like a gritty feel to it. If it has like a gritty feel to it, it's like gotten bumped a little bit out of place, and the layer lines on the 2 prints are kind of engaging with each other, and it kind of gives it this. See if we can do it here. Kind of gives it that kind of, whatever, grinding gear feeling to it. So the top and bottom panels, these are the same. So if you print it yourself and you got one that looks nicer than the other, put the nicer looking one on the top. This one I've apparently gotten some, it's probably heatsink compound on my fingers. So those go in like that. Again, make sure that the power button is working like normal. So now we've got a little I/O shield. There's a little break in this that goes, kind of balances it on the edge of the circuit board until we get the side of the case in place. On these cases, there are, on this side, there is a place where you can put a little piece of filter material. See how there's that filter mesh in there? Anyway, that'll help reduce the amount of dust that collects inside the case. Of course, then it's just stuck in the filter, so you got to clean the filter instead of cleaning the heat sink. But you can take that out. You can just undo the 2 screws, take that piece of filter out, and then put it back together. And the air will flow a little better, but like I say, you might get more dust in your heat sink. And so that's pretty much everything. I don't have an SD card on hand to test, but the SD card slot is accessible. It's just you know, upside down from the way it is on the Raspberry Pi. It's on the top of the board. That's right there. There it is, plugged in as if it it's too bright in here to really see any of the effects. One of the effects that I put into this one is that this grill pattern that's up here is actually in the infill on these sides, but you can't see it at all because it's way too bright in here. There you go. Maybe you can see it now. Yeah, probably not. Anyway, that's the case. There's a place on the bottom to mount 2.5-inch hard drive or SSD. There's some screws included for mounting it. You'll need a SATA to USB 3, and I believe only the top port here is USB 3. I believe the bottom port is just a regular USB 2 port. So anyway, that's what it looks like. There's links to everything down there. If you want to make one of your own, or you want to just buy one from me, or if you want to buy a pair of the brackets so that you can make your own and not have to get the brackets metal cut. I had to buy 11 because that was like, or enough to make like 10 or 11 cases, because that was like the minimum order from the place I ordered from. So it was like, I'd be just giving away money if I didn't order 10 sets of them. I got them cut from Sin Cut Sin. I had a good experience with them. So these are the cooling tests that I've done. There's a whole bunch up here that are those like heat sink cases. It didn't do nothing, but it didn't do much. Even with a 40mm Noctua fan, it was 78 degrees, and putting the little air filter over the fan, over the Noctua fan, made it where it throttled again just 4 minutes in. With the 30mm fan it came with, it throttled at 2 minutes basically. So the Orange Pi 5 with the Ice Tower heatsink, using the thermal pad. I did a 6-minute test. All of these tests, I let it go until either until it throttled or until the temperature had been stable for a minute, or had not, continued going up for a minute. Sometimes they kind of go up and down, but anyway, where it had not increased temperature for more than a minute. So it took 6 minutes. I was satisfied that it was sort of heat soaked, and this is with the thermal pad. It reached 52 degrees. So then I put it inside the case with the little filter in place, and with the thermal pad it was 59 degrees, so 7 degrees warmer to be in the case with the filter. And then I switched out the thermal pad for the copper and Noctua paste, the way we set this one up. And it was 47.2 degrees. So that's kind of the best comparison that I made between the thermal pad and the copper. And it was 12 degrees, almost 12 degrees. So then I took the filter out of the side just to see sort of max cooling inside a case, and it was 45 degrees like that. These are all with 77 degree Fahrenheit ambient temperature, which is 25 degrees Celsius. And the tests were done with the ST-TUI thermal testing utility inside Ubuntu. So that's my experience with it. That does mean, like in any of these modes, really, even with the thermal pad, with all 4 cores fully stressed out, it doesn't throttle, it doesn't overheat or anything like that. So it is an effective cooling system. If I had to guess, I would guess that the 52 Pi, the low profile version, the official version they have out now, if you do similar things with the heat transfer material, it probably gets similar cooling, but mine has a cooler looking case. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.